no real well-structured climate change curriculum, which is somewhat scandalous. So we're hoping that these things can build it. This is carbon vision, where you, in this particular act, you see red, you can see the high carbon vehicles, and you can swap vehicles, high carbon vehicles for electric vehicles and things like that. Anyway, we did get some initial stuff that we're about to publish. So over 50% said that playing the game had made us think differently about climate change in our own area, and we've got some amusing stories of how what they meant by that. I'll tell you that later. So that's it really. Some of the inspiration, I think, comes from a project that you've probably heard about in New York, the Rising Currents, big public, display, big design competitions about how will we make New York resilient, and what ideas can we put out there. And it's not hiding the fact that we're going to have sea level rise. What do we do with it to make it work? And I think that's kind of the spirit. Make this stuff fun, make it positive, get people involved in their own futures. And we think that if that was scaled up, you could move more people and get more action more quickly. So I'm going to leave that there. If you want any, that's a group of my colleagues in the UK, not the big name, but there are a bunch of resources online if you want any of that. I don't know if we're making these slides available, but happy to get you access to the slides, etc. Okay. Anyway, thank you. That probably went a little long.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
You want to?
I actually have a question. Can I start?
Yeah.
Big time.
I'm just starting a research project on urban biodiversity. And our hypothesis is that if you take action at the community level to respond to climate change, you're not necessarily doing anything about biodiversity loss. But if you take action about reversing biodiversity loss, you're probably taking action in response to climate change. Now, Stephen, you really knocked a hole in that hypothesis.
Okay.
No, I think it's great because the climate change innovations and actions that you showed here were also biodiversity actions. So the urban forestry, the Kelowna and the Kimberley examples, I think were really promoted biodiversity.
Although that is partly, intentional. So I wouldn't throw away your whole
No,
hypothesis, because
I'm not going to.
It's
because
really easy to think about
it's
things in certain frames,
yeah.
and other things get lost. So I think the examples there. One of the things that the kind of the visioning process does is it sort of forces you to put everything in the picture literally. So what is going to happen if the tree grows? What's going to happen to the tree? It's just a visual prompt to ask questions about those things. But I think specifically on things like urban forestry, it's one of those under discussed topics, and we don't think about it in terms of the impact on cooling, but the impact on biodiversity, stormwater flow reduction. You're starting to see a lot more research on that now, but I think it's taken for granted, and we do need to plan for it as well.
Yeah, I agree. And so one of the co-benefits of climate action is rarely listed as biodiversity preservation. Mm-hmm. People don't talk about it, so I think it's important. Okay, questions for us?
And can I ask you, please,
Oh,
so
you
that
want to do
people
that?
can see you?
Okay.
You don't have to sit.
We're hiding.
It's fine.
Are we okay to sit or stand?
Sit or stand as you wish, but just so we can see.
I like standing.
We'll stand. So it's easy to get a better idea.
Yeah. Go
I have a
ahead.
question with there for Steve, I think. Sorry, I didn't. So you talked about your visualizations, and that's what our research group kind of defined as, or it fits the category of non-structural measures to implement flood protection. And one example we had was the renderings of the houses that had to be raised. So this was a research project, right?
It was an applied research project. It was funded, same project you worked on.
So how do you think in the future will those projects be able to be funded by
Well, actually, you should ask that question of Maggie, because what's happening is that municipalities are stepping up to the plate now and are starting to fund both obviously planning and engineering studies, but also fairly in-depth engagement studies. And I guess maybe we'll hear a little bit more about that later, right? So it's starting to happen as a sort of mainstream operational cost budgeting thing by those more forward-looking cities, particularly who were the first to go out and jump into these. I mean, they're tricky waters, right? Property values, and no one wants to hear about disaster happening on their block or their house. So it is tricky, but I think it's starting to get institutionalized. But I also think that the last comment is that there is a role, and it's one of the PICS findings from those studies, there's a really strong role for that third-party group. It doesn't have to be researchers, sometimes it can be. It could be NGOs, it could be or community groups, or could even be businesses in theory, who are not government, they're not telling you what to do, but they're injecting useful information in useful ways into a community in some collaborative way. And we found, I think MC3 bears that out. So if you look
absolutely.
at NGO role,
And
for
the
example.
Fraser Basin Council.
Yeah, Fraser Basin
Yeah.
Council, Columbia Basin Trust,
Yeah.
who cannot really regulate everything, but they can provide a lot of useful information. And we've been told that's really helpful because it supports and reinforces what the planners are trying to say to their councils. The councils may or may not want to hear it. So I think it's important to have some resources go into that kind of things, whether it's funding NGOs or funding researchers, but whatever. I think there's some balance.
Thanks.
I guess I've got a question about the demographic transition that many Western societies are experiencing. The majority of our, not the majority, but a much greater proportion of our population is becoming older, senior citizens. They have mobility issues, and I noticed with some of the non-structural flood mitigation that it involved a lot of steps. There's a lot of work being done on aging in place, and there seems to be kind of a conflict there, and I'm not sure of that. Is that being considered? Because it seems like there's multiple plans, like there's plans to ensure people different abilities that might not be able to walk or able to get there, and then you have the climate change adaptation plan that's kind of conflicting itself.
Yeah.
How does that get addressed?
Very interesting.
That's a really good question,
Yeah.
and obviously it needs to be. So a lot of these scenarios still are not speculative exactly, but not fleshed out, right? Not thought through yet. That's the process that cities are now starting to do. Is a lot of nuances in any sort of initial range of scenarios. They all sound good, but then what are the real feasibility problems? And so I think that's a huge one. I think the aging in place is a big issue for us. I see some real positives with mitigation because people want to live in smaller homes and have more people close by and people who can help, and so it's a much more mixed society. I think with adaptation could be a problem, and I think I haven't seen any studies on that specifically, but it would be really a good lens to put on these things.
Yeah, that's a fascinating
Yeah,
question.
that's a very good question.
Yeah.
I have a question about the flip side of that challenge, which is the tyranny of pavement that Kevin's referring to, and sort of our infrastructure priorities. And there's just so much concrete in a lot of these solutions, and I'm wondering if there are any real alternatives. I mean, it's sure there are dangers to having urban forests when we're talking about older populations and people with mobility limitations and needing to wheel around, and I can pavement makes things easier, but it also just is really mind-numbing after a while when we're looking at our cities too.
Yeah, and certainly when you look at the spending profile of that, which is probably the largest of the infrastructure programs, certainly in recent history, it is very telling. And there's sort of two or three comments around that. One refers to a study that I didn't talk today, which was a survey of local governments and their state of planning around adaptation. And one of the areas that was identified was funding for planning activities. So this isn't the actual construction of something, which political decision makers tend to like. Go back to ribbon cutting, but rather support and money made available, especially for smaller and mid-sized communities, to build capacity or just to pay experts or consultancies to help them decide on how to do things differently. So that, I think, is an important part of the infrastructure funding envelope, is to think about not only money for actual physical works, but money to support planning and capacity building, which gets at using the tools that I think Stephen has talked about today, being able to apply those to different settings. The second dynamic is injecting criteria, because the flow of money is a really powerful way of changing things. That if you ask local governments to begin to think about the resiliency characteristics or contribution of a project that they're applying for, and to explain that, or to explain why it's not present, that could be a really interesting motivator for moving things in a very, very different direction. If it's made very clear that there are funding priorities that are not necessarily pavement focused. And to be frank, this most recent program, people who may have gone through the application process might have a different perspective. But certainly in talking to the Auditor General's Office and the PBO, and even some quiet conversations with Infrastructure Canada, the emphasis was on getting the money out the door. So the criteria for evaluation was, were the appropriate Treasury Board and accounting procedures followed in the distribution and accounting for of money, rather than any kind of impact analysis or substantive adaptation, resilience, environmental quality, well-being criteria being applied at the application stage. And we don't know what the employment impact of that $4 billion is. There's some general guesstimates that the agencies will say there are some uncertainties, which is a very nice way, as a former public servant, of saying, I have no idea. So, I think that the dollar distribution and then applying criteria to that, which have to be flexible and responsive, but maybe begin to help us move thinking in a direction that's non-pavement. But I have to say that one, it just instantly leapt out at us, because there was certainly the perception that the money was being spent in different ways, but when you look at the distribution of projects,
and if you're funding
extremely
roads, you're
revealing.
just funding the business as
Yeah.
usual. We're funding the shape of our communities now. Are there roads on Eagle Island?
That's interesting. Not really, actually.
People don't
No,
use
they
cars
they go
in the
across in this
community.
little. They're converting their boats to electric boats now.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and then they walk.
Yeah,
It's
so
very
it's-
small.
these kinds of communities that don't have pavement are an interesting example,
Yeah.
I think, like
Yeah.
Protection Island and Nanaimo too does. They have golf carts,
Yeah.
and they use walking
Right.
paths
Yeah.
with their golf carts.
Pavements is interesting, because we can see that there's a movement, rural roads that are presently gravel or even maintained to a very high standard. If there's it's not uncommon to see a spending or improvement decision made around paving that, rather than upgrading that, or even de-paving areas or de-concretizing areas, which I think would be a really interesting question to explore. Do we pave and coat over places that really don't need to be or shouldn't be? And I think that's different perspectives on why that is feasible or not feasible or desirable in some
So
locations.
a flippant answer is that I'm reading a book right now called New York 2140.
Right.
And of course, Manhattan is underwater, and all of lower Manhattan has disappeared. Upper Manhattan is still there, but they're using skywalks between buildings so that people can move around the city on these skywalks, because up to the 3rd or 4th floor is inundated. And it's interesting because pavement's gone, there are no roads, and people use boats. So the boats are the new cars, unfortunately, equally carbon intensive. But it's interesting how quickly the shape of the city changes without the roads.
I just add one comment. When we've done, or we've had people do their own block and done a sort of grey-green analysis of the pervious and impervious area, I mean, the numbers are staggering. The impervious is easily 60, 70
Yeah.
on a fairly typical block percent. And if you actually look at how much use the roads get in many of those cases, they literally are parking lots, and that's about it. And there's a bit of activity in the morning and a bit of activity in the evening and occasional things. But an extraordinary amount of highly valuable land is locked up
Yeah,
for a single
that's right.
purpose.
Yeah, just a comment on that maybe is that, like, the challenge isn't necessarily all the technical ones. The challenge is this is what people want, like people of the voting constituents. Like, when you look at what the local issues are around here, go to North Shore, what do people want? They want the upper levels highway to be widened. They want traffic congestion to be lowered. They want more pavement. They're not looking for that solution. And that's the challenge. When you look at the houses in Richmond, the little houses of yesterday are now being maximized to fill the entire space of the lot. So you get to that 70% impervious. And even that impervious area they have left, they want to pave it and put a deck and have their barbecue out there and stuff like that. So the challenge is public perception. That's why I really kind of liked your visualization element. Like when we talked about challenges with infrastructure and things like that, or even what you were showing with the raised homes and stuff. Biggest problem with raising a dike isn't getting the money together and putting the dirt there and stuff. The biggest problem is if there's someone living near there, they want to be able to see the water still. And it's getting past that. And that's why I really liked your presentation showing what the future is. One of the things we're trying to do in that same vein is we're trying to figure out how in our dike network we can do display projects that show what sea level rise means by 2100. That'll bring people in and help them understand where water level is now, where it is tomorrow, and somehow engage them in just some kind of passively helping them understand that these things are reasonably necessary over the next 30 or 40 years. Because they don't want it. They just look at the, what do I need right now? I like to be able to see the water, and that's it. Not the water might come over that one day.
Yeah, we had the same thing in Delta.
Yeah. Well, boundary
There's
bays
a lot
are
of
a great example.
resistance to it.
Yeah, and maybe even
Right.
flooded. So
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll take you first, and then we'll go back to you.
I was just curious who actually makes those visualizations that you utilize, and also how do
okay.
more.
So that's a really important point, and I'm sorry to skip over this, is that it used to be quite rare to find somebody. Basically, find a landscape architect is the quick solution is find a landscape architect because they're trained to do that kind of stuff. Not necessarily in this way, but they have the technical skills, 2D, 3D modeling, that kind of thing. But two things are happening. One is the ease of use of different kinds of software is becoming much simpler. So the programs like GIMP that are free for like photo imaging, there's SketchUp and things like that that people can do without any training. It may not be perfect, but the barriers are coming down. But I also think the integration of different disciplines into projects that used to live in silos, like landscape architects or some urban designers, those are the kinds of people, arts people. Look for people who have an artistic background because they're more likely to have dabbled in it. So we're seeing a bit of a convergence. I'm not saying that some training isn't necessarily helpful. Just because you can make a picture doesn't mean you make an accurate or a defensible picture. But I think the barriers are coming down, and I think it's more about expectation. We've done in conferences, we've asked sort of interdisciplinary conferences, asked people, how many people have these kinds of software? And all their offices have software. The right software. They have some kind of 3D, they have GIS, they have Photoshop, they have all the tools. And how many of them have graphics people? All the hands go up. Any big office, any consultant, any municipality has graphics people, but they're usually working on a particular kind of project, and you have to pull them out of that and put them into this group that's doing this other stuff. And then you can open up some possibilities. So it's not as hard as it seems, but it does take some looking and some experience and probably a better training track. That would also help.
Got another good question for us?
I don't know if it's A good question, more of a comment. My background is more climate change mitigation, and in that field, we think a lot about capital replacement cycles. Like, how long is that house going to last? How long is that car going to last? Between now and, let's say, 2050, 2060, we're probably going to have to repave a lot of parking lots. Why not take advantage of that to put in permeable pavement and try to find some sort of happy medium? Because I don't know how successful we're going to be in getting people in the suburbs like Kilowatt, where I'm from, to give up the car. I think that's going to be very difficult. So I think we talk about how do we create that resilient infrastructure through a happy medium.
So take away the parking lots and you get paradise again. So.
Yeah, I have to comment on that. I think the comment from our colleague in the front row is really very telling. It is to a great extent one of the most powerful obstacles to overcome is public expectation and desire, wider roads to get me to work quicker, a parking lot to keep my feet dry, perfectly covered, and so forth and so forth. And there is no more powerful motivator, as I think we see in the political setting here in British Columbia, than blacktop politics. So we have major infrastructure projects that are being proposed for the province that are geared toward expanding highway capacity, and projects that are even aimed at increasing the speed on our highways. So the interior freeways are now at 120 kilometers an hour, variable in the winter. So that, I think that's a social barrier and one of changing, reshaping public expectations and desires, and that's what, in the end, political leadership will respond to.
So thanks very much to
Okay, sorry.
Leslie and Kevin and Stephen.